Earlier, I spoke to Joseph Costa. He is the director of the Truman National Security Project's Nuclear Non-Proliferation Expert Group. I asked him to explain what's at stake, what the agreement accomplishes, and what's ahead.
What's on the table right now is we'll allow for some civil aviation spare parts to go back to Iran. There'll be some Iran will be able to repatriate what's estimated to be $6 to $7 billion of frozen assets that's now being held in foreign countries. Iran will have greater ability to export some of his oil, but all of these sanctions are reversible and they're temporary. So if Iran were to change its behavior overnight, or we were to see that they do not act in good faith efforts, then we can reimpose some of these sanctions. And let's keep in mind, right now, Iran is under a heavy set of sanctions, many of which still remain in place. How
quickly can those sanctions be reversed if, say, the United States and other Western powers decide that Iran is not complying with the agreement?
Well, it's a tricky situation in that some folks will certainly likely take advantage of the fact that some sanctions were lifted to try and make some deals with Iran because it is such a live market. But I would say that Iran is under enough pressure right now from the other sanctions that even incrementally over months to up to a year as these sanctions are reimposed, Iran would start to feel the heat pretty quickly again.
Right. We're hearing a lot of rhetoric about this agreement right now. I mean, we heard from the Israelis since the agreement was announced that the world is now a much more dangerous place, that this was a huge mistake. It was not a historic deal, it was a historic mistake, as we heard Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu say. Do the Israelis have a valid point?
I think Israel does have a valid point, as well as some of our Gulf allies. Let's keep in mind that the last time that we were negotiating in Iran in 2005, there's now credible evidence that Iran was also pursuing another covert enrichment facility at Fordow. We also have the latest IAEA report that came out only a few weeks ago that states since 2002, there's increasing concern that Iran had previously experimented with nuclear activities which might have had a military dimension. So those are very much a reality, and it makes those concerns very valid. With that said, the agreement and steps today which pause really critical parts of Iran's program which pose a direct danger in the near term is a significant achievement. The next round of negotiations, I think, are going to need to address certain things such as Iran's previous historical activities. We'll need to interview Iranian scientists that worked in those activities. This is all part of what would be a comprehensive deal to get to a better understanding of what Iran's total historical activities were.
But the Israeli viewpoint is predicated on some assumptions. One of the assumptions being that A, Iran wants to develop a nuclear weapon, and B, that it wants to use that weapon in an offensive way. Have we seen any evidence of that?
Well, the United States position right now is that Iran has yet to make a decision to acquire a nuclear weapon. And I think that the question of intent is a very, very important one, because one of the drivers that would drive Iran to want to acquire a nuclear weapon is if it felt perpetually under the threat of attack from the United States primarily. And this is another reason why this agreement is important, because by seeing certain steps where you can envision a world where the U.S. has more normalized relations with Iran, it undermines that security threat that Iran may feel if it to ultimately decide to acquire a nuclear deterrent.
Okay, now let's look at the opposition to this deal in the U.S. Congress. How strong is that opposition, and can it be translated into undermining the deal?
While there's opposition, Congress is going to be briefed by Secretary Kerry. They're going to be in active communication with the White House, and they might wait to see all the details that come out. And as we learn more and more about the details of this deal, I think it becomes clear that this was a significant diplomatic achievement in providing the political space for a possible comprehensive resolution that both really minimizes to the greatest degree possible the nuclear Iran risk, and second, leaves the U.S. in fairly strong footing.